I know it's kind of early on a Monday morning, but I read something on the news today that was actually written on Sunday in the Telegraph that has me red hot and angry, though not for the reason you may think. This article I saw caught my attention here by Daniel Hannan. Trump has betrayed Ukraine and making the world immeasurably more dangerous. Subtitle: No U.S. president has done more to make the West weak again than the current incumbent. It will take decades to repair the damage. I thought, wow, what in the world has Trump done that's got this guy so unhappy? Well, I didn't really have to wonder too much, because this guy represents the grounded elite in the Western world right now, whether it's the United States or London or elsewhere in Europe. This is Western elite thinking. That's why I'm taking the time to do this, because the ideas that he floats in here are widespread across the elite. And that goes also into the mainstream media throughout the Western world and throughout the United States as well. And it is a very fractured, incomplete, and in fact, badly distorted reflection of reality. And the conclusions that a normal person would reach if they had all the information would be nearly the polar opposite of what he reaches here. Now, this is not a defense of Donald Trump. As you know, I've got many things I have problems with, some of the things he's done, but he does get a lot of credit, and I absolutely hope he has success in Alaska on Friday. That is what I'm hoping for, because that will end the bloodshed. And at least he's trying. Even though he's not done it in very effective ways, he is trying, as opposed to all of those in the West. And that includes official statements on Saturday by the European Union leaders, the key leaders that with France, Germany, Great Britain, and several others, Ursula von der Leyen, all basically contradicting and refuting everything Trump said, though trying to put some niceties on it. This article here has no niceties put on it, but it is so distorted you cannot imagine. One of the reasons we have this channel and why I'm doing this show is because too many times, if someone was just reading this article and they didn't have the knowledge that we're about to provide, you may be tempted to think, wow, well, I guess he did do that, because I do know that this happened in 2014, and I know that happened in 2022. So, golly, I guess he's right. Boy, we better be worried. Only it's not the case. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this article here and take a couple of key paragraphs out and tell you what the guy's not telling you, and explain what actually happened and why you should be very worried. Not that Trump is betraying the Ukraine, but that the West is betraying itself. We are the author of our disaster. There, he is right in the sense that Ukraine has lost this war. You've been heard us talking about that from the beginning. And this summit coming up on Friday could start to bring that into fruition and firm it up and start to get some deadlines and some dates when this thing can happen. Could also go 100 other ways. I'm not going to predict how that's going to happen, but the war is lost. And that I can categorically say. Ukraine has lost, the West has lost, and Russia has won. How big the price tag is going to be for the end of that, both for Russia and for the West, especially for Ukraine, that's yet to be determined. But it's just going to be either huge or massively huge. Depends on how it goes starting on Friday. But the end result is known. This guy is making it sound like it's all about Trump, absolving himself of any, and the West at the same time, of any responsibility for anything that has happened here. The Biden administration, the entire term of the Biden administration, doesn't even get a word, not even the name, crickets only. No, it's Trump, because Trump is roundly disliked in many parts of Europe. So it's easy to make him the boogeyman. He's actually more disliked, especially in elite Western thinking, than Putin is. They say, well, yeah, of course, he's a tyrant and a dictator, but Trump, he's harming our own interests. So now that they're actually trying to make Trump out to be the bad guy. No way. I'm not going to allow that, because it's not Trump that's the bad guy here. It's the Western elite. They're the ones who are causing this problem. They are the ones who did not take any action diplomatically when it was available to prevent this war from launching, who have avoided every diplomatic off-ramp that has been offered and available. They shunned them all. And the only thing they did, and are still doing to this day, is trying to support more fighting, giving more weapons, more ammunition, even though there's no rational path for a military victory. That's where they're sticking in here. Let's see how we got here. Let me run to the first paragraph here right off the bat. We'll just start there. Let's see. So I've already read you the headline there. Let's just start right at the beginning. This is a straightforward defeat. Certainly agree with him there. A defeat not just for Ukraine, but for the values of the Anglosphere and its allies have upheld since 1941 to the immense benefit of the human race. I largely agree with that too. Aggression is being rewarded. Okay, now we're starting to get into some crap. Borders are being changed by force. That's accurate, but we'll see why that is. A brittle dictatorship has defeated a Western alliance with a combined economy 40 times larger than its own. The prestige of the democracy is suffering a Suez level hit. Now, even before I continue on, let me just kind of talk about that part right there, because that right there alone, even in his own telling, is very illuminating. It's not just Donald Trump. Trump's just been in office for 6 months. This war's been going on for 3.5 years, my friend. So where is this big alliance? It's 40 times larger, according to your analysis, than the Russians. And yet they're this brittle Russian unit, organization, military. It's this brittle thing. So you like to minimize them at the same time, and yet you're talking about the loss, meaning everything before Trump came in was pathetic. If you're telling me that this brittle dictatorship has outdone all this, it's not because of Trump's fault. He wasn't in office. So who was in office? Keir Starmer, Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron, Scholz, now Merz, all these guys. So you want to start pointing some fingers at the guys who failed to get this done. And one of the biggest failures they made was that their absolute unwillingness to acknowledge any kind of failure on their part. And I'm going to get into some more of that. But let's go on now, because let's see why they're blaming Trump. So they say from the moment Trump took office, he has been wheedling and conciliatory with Putin, aggressive and bullying with Volodymyr Zelensky. Who can say what animates him? Perhaps he can't forgive Zelensky for his cameo role in l'affaire Hunter Biden. Perhaps, as conspiracy theorists claim, Putin has compromised on him. Or perhaps it's simply Trump's customary deference towards dictators. Yeah, he just loves dictators. That's it. He's just a bad guy. Frankly, it doesn't much matter. Whatever his motives, Trump has behaved exactly like a Russian asset would, not only vis-a-vis Ukraine, but also by making aggressive territorial claims against Denmark and threatening Canada with annexation. His tariff policies have caused as much disruption to the Western economies as his sanctions have to Russia. Putin could not have wished for more. We do not know how much has already been settled, and there's still details to be hammered out, but the broad outlines of the proposed ceasefire deal can be glimpsed in leaks both in America and in the Russian media. So look, let's be clear here. There's a reason why this has failed. There's a reason why we haven't got that stuff. He's just trying, that whole paragraph there, all he's trying to do is demonize Donald Trump. Take your eyes off of all the things that have happened. Take your eyes off of everything that happened in the 3 years prior to this. No, just focus on what's happened since January 20th of this year. And here's all these reasons why Donald Trump is a demon. Right. And I'm no fan of the tariff issue. I've got big problems with that. I think that is some errors that he's making. That's not good for anybody, not good for the United States or these other countries. That's a separate issue, completely separate issue. We're talking about this war here. We're going to keep the focus right here. And on the topic he had that Trump has allegedly betrayed Ukraine. No, he hasn't. In fact, he is the only guy who's trying to bring this war to an end. Joe Biden never even attempted to do so. All he wanted to do was make Russia weaker. All Keir Starmer wanted to do, in fact, going back to Boris Johnson and all the British prime ministers before that, every one of them, all of them in lockstep, no matter what party they're from, just wanted to have more war. And they're getting it. Same with Scholz of Germany and now Merz in Germany. Same situation. Macron never changed on any of that. All they want is war with Russia. And so they are going to continue to focus. Every time there was an off-ramp, going all the way back to the Minsk agreements. So let's start in 2015. We could start actually earlier than that, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But we'll start at 2015 for this part. We had a chance to just adopt the Minsk agreements and put them into action. And the key thing that the Russians needed in order to meet their obligations to withdraw their forces was that the Ukrainian constitution had to be changed first, because from the Russian perspective, and you can hate Russia, this makes perfect sense. If you were helping the Luhansk and Donetsk republics because in the civil war in Ukraine, and it was a civil war from 2014 all the way up until this war broke out in February 2022, Russia said that we're going to help our ethnic brothers inside of Ukraine fighting off their civil war against the western part of the country, because you eliminated their language, you made it forbid them to do any kind of business and whatnot in their language, got rid of a lot of their education, a lot of their religion, etc. And so they said, okay, until you change your constitution and allow a modicum of autonomy remaining inside of Ukraine, don't forget that, they still would have remained a part of Ukraine. The whole Donbass would have remained a part of Ukraine under the control of Kiev. They just had to give them a measure of political autonomy and protection for the people. That's what Russia said. And then they would withdraw, and they would withdraw their support. They never did withdraw their support. So a lot of people in the West want to point to Russia and say they're the bad guy because they didn't accomplish the Minsk agreements themselves. And they said, we're happy to do so, but we won't do so until you do this. What sense would it make to withdraw all of your military support? And this side never did the most fundamental thing, which is to protect the rights of your citizens and your ethnic brothers who were being waged this battle during the Civil War. It would be irrational to do so. Russia wasn't irrational. Now, again, let's not make that there's any innocent parties here. I'm not defending Russia. I'm sure there's plenty of things they did to actually violate some of the terms, but the fundamental core issue was that constitutional change, which Ukraine adamantly refused to make. And certainly it's been widespread reported that France and Germany, especially their leaders at the time, had never any intention on adopting this or applying it, never put any pressure. Neither the American administrations ever put pressure on the Ukraine to actually implement those. Instead, they spent all that time, to include all during the first term of Trump, to build up the forces. That's what they were doing the whole time. Instead of trying to get the Minsk agreements done and eliminate this as a possibility, all we did is build up forces. We kept talking about NATO enlargement, all that kind of stuff. That's what happened in there. And that's why we had this issue that was a constant friction during the whole 8 years, and why Russia never pulled out of it. And then now that before the war came off, Zelensky had passed a law in, I want to say it was March of 2021. It said they will recover all of the territories lost from 2014, to include Crimea. And for Russia, that they said that's a red line. That's ours. It's been annexed. It's been voted into the Russian constitution, etc. That's not for upper debate. And if you try to go down that path along with NATO, then we're going to use what they said, quote, military technical means to stop it. And so that's what's prompted then Russia. Again, you can disagree with this. I'm not concerned about that. But when you take an action, do not expect there to be no counteraction. See, that's one of the things we love to do. We want to do whatever the hell we want to do. We want nobody to take any actions we don't like. And if we do, it's that we're pointing the finger at them. It's like you walked into a bear's den, you shoved the bear, and when the bear slapped you in the face, you said, oh, look how violent and aggressive this bear is. Well, of course, if you go into his home territory and you push him, he's going to react. Whether he should or shouldn't, he will, because that's human nature. It's the same thing here. When you go into these areas and then you say, we're going to take this back, there will be an action and a counteraction. So you're not even attempting to do it diplomatically. You're just he declared that he was going to. So Russia starts moving forces as a warning, don't go down that path. And then you had Jens Stoltenberg at the time, NATO Secretary General, talked over and over about how NATO would go into Ukraine. Nobody tells us who gets to join our alliance, he said repeatedly, and writ large across the elite Western Europe. Nobody tells us who's going to join NATO. We decide, and if we want to invite them, we are. And by the way, we are. We have it in our declaration going all the way back to 2008 in the Bucharest Memorandum, and we've repeated it every year since, and I'm repeating it now. Stoltenberg said that emphatically in December 2021. At the same time, Russia was offering another treaty, which would again have resulted in their forces and support withdrawing from the Donbass and leaving that under the control of the Ukraine side. But the terms were a little worse than they were during the Minsk. But it's still, and this was admitted by Stoltenberg himself, Putin said this would forestall war. But if you don't do this, we will use military force. He told him that. He said it in public. But he apparently was very clear behind the scenes. Stoltenberg admitted it and said, of course we didn't sign that. So you knew that you could have avoided war by simply saying, hey, we're going to have a situation here to where what we had already agreed to, basically in the Minsk agreements, that there's going to be limited autonomy for the Donbass area, but it's still going to be under the control of Ukraine. No, that can't be enough. We want full control. We don't want anybody, anything. There's no autonomy. We're not going to go back to protect the rights of the Russian-speaking people. We're not going to do any of those things. And again, we don't want there to be any reaction. Well, that's foolish. Of course, there's going to be a reaction. I mean, that's the same as saying to the United States that, hey, we're going to have China is going to come and be a military alliance with Mexico on your southern border. But don't worry, it's just a defensive alliance. We're not a threat to anyone. And then they move military forces in there. We'd go crazy. But we expect us to do the same thing, and especially right up to the border, and there to be no problem with NATO moving in. And this declaration that that's where we're coming from. None of that was mentioned in this article. Didn't even address a shred of it. So then, and in fact, let me go back to it now. He says Putin will hang on to most of what he has seized, not just the territories he occupied in 2014, but many of the lands he has conquered since 2022, even according to some briefing, those parts of Donetsk that are currently under Ukrainian control. Sanctions will be eased and we collaboration between the United States and Russia than before 2014. In any event, the U.S. will stop supplying weapons to Ukraine. So let's now he goes back to 2014. Let's go with him. Again, no mention of any of what I'm about to tell you. According to what he wrote there, what he wants all of his viewers to understand is that, hey, no worries here. This is all Putin's. Either Putin's the bad guy or Trump's the bad guy or both in particular case. But us, we're innocent. We've done nothing. These darn Russians, man, all they want to do is collapse or conquer territories and take stuff that isn't theirs. That's in their nature. They're evil. They're wicked. You can't talk to them. The only language they understand is the language of force. We've heard that here just recently, just the last few days again. Well, is that the story, though? Did Russia do that? The answer is, of course, no. Anybody who knows anything about what actually happened is that there was an uprising in Ukraine, started in December 2013, when the president of Yanukovych, who was then the president of Ukraine, had been debating between an economic cooperation either with the European Union or with Russia. Apparently, most of the people, especially the vast majority in Western Europe, Western Ukraine, wanted union with the European Union. They wanted to look to the west. They didn't want to go to the east. People in the eastern part of the country, which was a large measure of who elected the president, said, yeah, we want to go with the Russian side. So it appeared that he was going to go to the European Union side. And then at the last minute, he pivoted and said, no, actually, we're going to go with Russia. We're going to align ourselves economically with the East. And that just sent people into a tizzy. No problem up to this point. This is what a democracy is supposed to be. The people get a chance to say the thing. If they want to protest peacefully, they can do that. If they want to make their voice heard, they have the right to do that, the full right to do that. And if Yanukovych made it look like he was going to go one way and then pivoted to the other side, that can make people unhappy. Okay, fair enough as far as it goes. Where it's no longer fair and where it stops is then it started to turn violent. And then the Yanukovych government started to be some crackdown on the protesters. And then there were some people that were shot, and a lot of people were killed in Maidan Square. There's a lot of disputes, and I'm not going to relitigate that here about who actually shot who. There's some evidence that there were snipers inside the crowd that actually pretended to be the government forces that shot innocent civilians and turned a melee. And then, of course, then brought all the international viewers onto the scene. And, of course, the now Russian-leaning government here, which was important to point this out, the legally, duly elected government of Ukraine. Whether you like them or hate them, whether you love their policies or hate their policies, they were the legally elected government in Ukraine. And according to us, according to the rules-based order that we've put in place since 1945, since the end of World War II, that's what's supposed to dominate. That's what democracy is. If you don't like the outcome, then you campaign harder. In the next election, you try to get your guys in there. That's how it's supposed to work. What we say we're against is the violent overthrow of any government that it's supposed to that's been elected by its people. We say we're against that. Not this time. And in fact, this time there started to be a lot of violence, and there was protests that just started building bigger and bigger and bigger because all the blame was on the Yanukovych government. And then so there was a European, let's see, I want to say it was a European contingent of leaders trying to negotiate it into the violence. There was a Russian contingent, obviously a Ukrainian contingent, and I can't remember. I think there was a European Union group, but all of them together, they finally came up with a deal. I believe this was on the 20th of February, 2014. And they came to a conclusion and said, okay, you know what? we're just going to have early elections. It was going to be May of that year. That was the decision that was made. The Russians agreed to it. The Russians agreed to it even though they knew that the overwhelming majority of public opinion within the entire country had shifted to the West, and that their guy would surely lose the election. But that wasn't satisfactory, and a lot of evidence shows that we then supported the violent takeover of Yanukovych, and that he was physically driven out of power. And then they said he was impeached, et cetera, because they didn't like it. We supported that. And of course, everybody knows. And if you don't Google it, and you'll find it. You had many American officials, the ambassador at the time, and some State Department officials who were actively conspiring to help one of the deciding, even not even to help, but deciding who among the opposition figures would be allowed to go into power and who they wanted to govern and all this kind of stuff. And openly supporting them, et cetera. So we were actively part of that. The Russians call that a coup. You can call it, sometimes we have on our side, well, it was taking an opportunity, a target of opportunity. You can put whatever kind of words you want it, but you actively supported the overthrow of a legally elected government. And when you had an election that would have gone your way anyway, we also subdued that. And then if we had any kind of continuity about our policies and our words and our actions, then after that happened and after Yanukovych was fled, we would have said, okay, but we still have to have this election. That's what's going to happen. So he needs to be safely brought back here, even though we don't like him or his policies. He needs to be safely returned here, and these elections need to be free, fair, and transparent. If we meant what our words say, that's what we would have done. We didn't. We cheered it on, and then we just went to town. And after that, and of course, that's when the civil war sparked, and there was all kinds of violence in the eastern part of the country by the forces of the new government in Ukraine against their eastern people. For some reason, we don't care about that. If the government under Yanukovych was accused of using violence to suppress protesters, why then did the entire Western world go silent when the resulting armed forces of the guys that took over there slaughtered their whole people in huge numbers? There were thousands of people that were killed in that civil war, even before it turned into kind of a stalemate, which then led to the Minsk agreements, et cetera. And I've talked about all that forward. That's what none of this article said. So that one little passage I read there where it went from 2014 up to today bypassed all of that. So you can see the reality is not just that Putin is the evil dictator who's been trying to take over since 2014. We have been very, very culpable in this process. And we have taken actions that precipitated other actions. You take an action, there will be a counteraction. It's just the laws of science. It's human nature. And to expect anything else is absurd and self-defeating, and that's where we are. All right, moving on. Let's go to the next. Oops, wrong one. Let's go to the next part here. If I can get my controls right. Sorry about that. Okay, back to the article here. The next one. Let's see. So now he's talking a lot about what's been reported about this meeting coming up in Alaska. A lot of reports are saying that, and Trump himself has said, there's going to be a lot of territory is going to get swapped, and Ukraine has to sign on to stuff. So he says, of course, that's a terrible thing. And then he says, let's see, we are backing Ukraine. Where is that? I may have passed it up. Nope. And now I can't find what I was looking for. Let me go to this other one here. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. This is it right here. To understand the scale of the West's defeat, we need to remember why we're backing Ukraine in the first place. Not because we thought that Zelensky was brave or handsome or even particularly democratic. Not because we believe that Ukrainians were kinder or more amusing than their Russian cousins. Not even because long before 2022, Russia had been buzzing our airspace and overseeing cyber attacks against our infrastructure, and had, on 2 occasions, committed acts of war against us when it ordered its operatives to carry out lethal attacks on British soil. No, we are backing Ukraine because it is the wronged party. We are sending it weapons because it was attacked without provocation by a neighbor to whom it presented no threat. We are training its soldiers because when Ukraine agreed to hand over its nuclear arsenal in 1994, did so for an explicit promise that its independence would be respected by the existing borders, promise guaranteed by Britain, the United States, and never forget Russia. Well, that's not exactly accurate. There were some, the document did provide that said that Ukraine would retain its territorial integrity. That's a true statement, but it never provided any kind of enforcement mechanisms. Nothing like in Article 5. But let's get back to the key area. We are backing Ukraine because it is the wronged party. But is it really the wronged party? Because I just laid the whole thing down for you. I don't need to even run through that part there about all the things that happened that we were complicit in. That's what happened, unprovoked. That's what we love to say. And they're still saying that 3.5 years into that. And look, that's just not true. And there's not any truth to that at all. We are, and I've just shown you. But see, this is the key area here, issue that I want to highlight here. We are setting the stage for our own demise. Because if by our unwillingness to acknowledge any kind of reality, our elite, get this, don't miss this part, folks. Our elite are misleading not the Russians, they're misleading us, the public. They're trying to sell you a bill of goods. We don't want peace here. We don't want this war to come to an end. We're not going to take any of the diplomatic off-ramps. We're not going to take our hands out of the pie of what's going on in Ukraine. We don't care about what happens to Russia. We don't want to do any of that. We want to keep selling them weapons. And the only way we can keep selling them weapons and keep this war machine going is if you believe that Trump is a danger because he wants to end the war. That Putin is the only bad guy here, and there's no reason for him to do what he's done. It's completely unprovoked. You have to believe that. Otherwise, if you recognize what I'm telling you and that there are no good parties here, there is lots of blood on everybody's hands. This war is stupid. It should never have started, and it should have been over at many opportunities, and there were many of them. Many places this could have been over. This is another one. And probably, and I said this once before, but it looks like we did get a second chance. This may well be the last chance we get to have a diplomatic solution where the war can just come to an end because of an agreement. And if we don't, then the likelihood is that Russia will finally say, and I think that's very possible. That's the reason why Putin agreed to do this in person and to have this personal summit so that he can say to the world, I tried to do this the diplomatic way. We tried to reach an accommodation, and he can just chronicle all the things I just told you and say, we've attempted it. Every one of them were rebuffed. Now then, the only path they're leaving us is the path of military. And we're going to just go until we conquer what we want, what we need for our national security. Spin be damned. That's what we're putting into a position here. This is why I keep pointing out why it is so crucial for you to understand. We want what we want, and we want no consequence. If we don't like something, we'll just spin it away. And politically, that can work. You can do that. But not when there's a war and there's a physical reality on the ground. The Ukraine army continues to get weakened. It is unknown how much longer they can hold out. But there is an end. There will come an end somewhere. Because just the overwhelming numbers of everything and every category of war and the manpower on the Russian side, it's just inevitable that at some point there'll be a break in the Ukraine side. It just almost can't be any other way. And for us to say, I'm going to continue to go down this path, and they're doing everything they can to subterfuge and to undercut Trump. They do not want this August 15th meeting to result in anything. They want it to be ended. I bet if they can prevent it from happening, I think that they're going to do that. And so you have things like this article here where they're saying, look, let's just understand this is bad. Trump is going to betray Ukraine. And so he's trying to build pressure against Trump from all of Europe and probably the United States too, because the Telegraph is read widely here. And certainly the elite here that love the war, that have done nothing, like all the guys who were supporting the Biden administration, who never even talked to Russia, made no attempt to end the war, just tried to compel and coerce a nation that is obviously stronger. It's self-dependent on itself. It doesn't have to rely on anybody else. It has help from Ukraine, from Iran. It has help from North Korea, but it can be self-contained because it has all the natural resources that it needs and all the manufacturing capacity. It can do the war even by itself if it lost all these. We can't. And so they don't want the war to end. They want it to continue on. And the only way that's going to happen is if they lie to you, and if they deceive you into believing something that's not true, if they prevent you from seeing something that is true so that you reach an erroneous conclusion. And this time, so far, the only consequence to this has been for the Ukrainian people. They have been the bill payers for all of this subterfuge, all of this lying, all of this deception that our elite across the Western world at the highest levels have been engaged in. They continue to die in large numbers. This war should have been over a long time ago. The killing should have stopped a long time ago, and now people would be in peace today. And we'd be well down the road to trying to repair a lot of the damage that had been done and at least coexisting so that nobody had to worry about a war or, God forbid, expanding into a nuclear war. All that is still on the table because I think we had John Mearsheimer on our show a week or so ago who's saying, I don't think the West is going to take this loss very well, and he worries about what may come next, however this thing is resolved. And certainly I share that concern. It's now even higher when you see stuff like this. But while Trump is meeting in here, and even though I think that he has some unrealistic expectations, he does have the power, and I really hope he exerts it to where he can either say, okay, I've worked this out with Vladimir Putin. Either you agree to these draconian terms or you're on your own. That's what Trump should do. It'll be really hard for him to do it, especially with this kind of stuff going on. But that is the one thing Trump can do if he actually wants this to come to an end. If he doesn't, if he is kowtowed and waylaid by all these elites who keep putting this pressure on, and he doesn't walk away, if he doesn't get the deal he wants, and he won't, he will not get an unconditional 30-day ceasefire. There's no way that Russia would do that. Why would they? He may come out with a limited air ceasefire from rockets and drones and whatnot, because that would benefit Russia. That benefits both sides. So both sides would be willing to do that. I don't think ultimately that'll make a lot of difference, but it's possible he gets that. But he certainly won't get the 30-day unconditional ceasefire, and he's not going to get any agreement on the Russian side to hand back any of the territories that they have. In fact, they're going to still demand more territories that they don't have in the administrative borders of those 4 provinces. That's where we are. So if we get to that point and Trump doesn't get the deal here, the risk is that Europe is going to say, we'll take it. We'll pick the ball up from here, and we're going to keep going down this road. And we're going to keep going in the process to fund whatever left of Ukraine to continue fighting. And of course, if their army then collapses at some point, because that would be the likely scenario if the United States walks away, or even if it doesn't. Because look, the reality is that Trump can't backtrack on that. He can't say, all right, you know what, fine, I'm going to throw these sanctions on you, and we're going to start giving massive amounts of artillery and rockets and all this. We don't have them because we've given so many away over the last 3.5 years to Ukraine, and now a ton of them to Israel during their war against Iran and all this other stuff, and all the stuff that we did in the Red Sea against the Houthis. We don't have them, folks. So Trump can't go that way. So there's nothing he can do that's going to prevent the military conquest of Ukraine, even if it takes through the year 2027. I can't imagine that the Ukraine army could possibly hold out that long. But if they did, Russia can do this because they have the capacity to keep going in every category of war that you need. That's what is so alarming about this and makes me so angry, is that the elite in our world right now wants to put all the blame over on, first of all, Russia, and then secondly on Donald Trump. And it's wrong in both cases, because while there is wrongdoing on Putin and Trump, without question, our hands are deep in blood up to our elbows. That's the reality, and that's what they're blinding from you. They're hiding from you. And they have kept this war going way past its expiration date, and the killing continues on there. And if we're not really careful, this thing could spin out of anyone's control and could end up engulfing us. The longer the war goes on, the longer that threat stays alive, that somebody does something stupid, that somebody makes a miscalculation, that there's just an accident, a mistake, an error. That's happened many times. And suddenly we could find ourselves in a war with Russia, something that nobody can control, either in the West or in the East. That's one of the reasons we need to get out of this. And of course, that's one of the reasons, the biggest one that's always motivated me, is that I actually care about the Ukrainian people that are paying with blood and bodies for all of this insanity that guys like the author of this article here are blithe to. They could care less about the casualties. The ones in the past are the ones that they're condemning to death now. That's what is so enraging about this to me, is that they are so focused on whatever it is, winning, getting economic benefit, selling arms and ammunition, helping the military industrial complex, whatever, fill in the blank. It doesn't matter what the actual motivation is, only that it exists and that it's perpetuating war that can't be won, and at the expense of the Ukrainian people, and if carried far enough, could expand to us. And God help us all if that happens, because then the chances of a nuclear escalation are through the roof from one side or the other. And we can never predict any of that. The only thing we can do is we can hope that President Trump will have the backbone and the courage necessary to do what is necessary to get this war over with quickly by any means necessary. Because he's not just going against Vladimir Putin, folks. He's going against the entire Western elite. That is a fact and something that we all need to be aware of. This is why we have this channel. Be sure and share this with other folks, my friends. Don't keep this to yourself. Let's make sure that people are aware. This is not just that boogeyman Putin and the bad guy Trump. We're in this situation not because of Trump, but because of the elite West. And they don't want you to know that. We've exposed it now. And I want to make sure that everybody else is aware of it too. Well, listen, appreciate it. We've got a bunch of other shows later on this afternoon, and we will certainly see you later this afternoon on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.